Welcome to One on One. I am Cyril Stober. The story of tertiary education in Nigeria is replete with numerous challenges, ranging from inadequacies in infrastructure and critical manpower to funding for research. To address the identified lapses, an intervention agency was set up to provide supplementary support through funding and project management for the rehabilitation and restoration of the sector. But it would seem that the demands of tertiary education are stretching such initiatives to the limit. Today, I'm with the Executive Secretary of the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, otherwise known as TET Fund. Suleiman Elias Bogoro is a professor of animal science, specializing in biochemistry and ruminant nutrition. He is a prolific researcher with publications in more than 65 international and local journals and other academic platforms. He is a professorial external assessor to several universities, a collaborating scientist to the Raw Materials Research and Development Council. Professor Bogoro is a consultant in many projects with the World Bank, UNDP, USAID, DFID, etc. He has innovated a rumen fermentation model and has developed a modified re-entrant rumen cannulation surgical technique. Well, in just a moment, he'll be telling us what those terms mean in plain, simple English. But let's establish that he has an unrepentant passion for R&D, that's research and development. Professor Bogoro, welcome to One on One.
Thank you so much, Cyril.
Right. Let's start from this introduction and what you've innovated. You're a professor of animal science. So what's rumen fermentation model?
Very much. I think we're starting from the very right, the very center of my research entrepreneurship at the PhD level at that time, and subsequently what I've done to mentor others. My PhD work on rumen fermentation, rumen physiology, and precisely over time we discovered that we needed to know some of because in nutrition of livestock, I mean, it's important that we take advantage of the rather ordinarily wasted and wasteful materials from the crop harvest. And crop residues are very important. And over time, we needed to know the chemical contents of those materials, and if they are taken up by rumen animals, cattle, sheep, and goats, as it were. My PhD work was on small ruminant sheep, precisely, both in Nigeria and the Railway Research Institute, Aberdeen, and of course in the Cambridge Veterinary School in UK. And it was important to know how these animals utilize those materials, one, in the context of improving productivity, which has been a major challenge in livestock production. And for those of us in the room, including dairy science and as it were, we needed to be very sure that our animals are more productive than it has been for a long time. For instance, for dairy, you will imagine that our local breeds are producing 1, 2, 3 liters of milk per day, contrasted with 10 to 20 times that in temperate countries. And so, nutrition became a central area, and we needed to know precisely how do we know the science involved in improving the productivity under nutrition. So I did that work and came up from my PhD work to look at the various feedstuffs, roughages as we call them, that can be improved upon and to make maximum contribution to improving productivity for those animals. That's why we went into that inquest of the physiology of the rumen, the largest stomach, so to say. Biology, we always talk about 4 stomach ruminant animals. The largest is the rumen.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. And the second one you also credited with is a modified re-entrant Roman cannulation surgical technique.
Thank you very much. Just quickly, I still remember at the beginning of my PhD work, we needed to get across to Abu's area because my PhD work was in ATBU Bauchi, but one of my supervisors was from ABU, the late Professor Umuna. And we needed his assistance in terms of what ABU and at the NAPRI, National Animal Production Research Institute, were doing to do the surgery of cannulating the rumen, the abomasum, etc. And those are all components of the digestive tract of animals. And for the purpose of understanding body physiology and the biochemistry at that level of the digestive system of the ruminant animals. And we tried, ABU had a rumen cannulation technique that had worked for quite a while. And we wanted to adopt it in ATBU. We did 1 or 2 surgeries and discovered 2-3 times that the animal did not survive after a while. And the reason was simple. One, that the surgical technique was rather faulty. The same entry point was where the cannula was also exteriorized. And that was not good because it exposed the animal to infection. That was one. Secondly, the cannula was rather very heavy. It was very heavy, in fact about 400 grams, as it were. And that was too heavy for the belly of the animal. And so that's why they died. And so my supervisor then, Professor Al-Hassan, a Ghanaian, advised that I go to Railway Research Institute, Aberdeen, Scotland, with Professor Oskov, to learn the technique, the better technique of undertaking this surgical procedure. And we succeeded. Came back, adopted it with our animals, the young Kasa rams, as well as our bulls. And they survived for 5 years and above. So PhD, MSc students have been produced over time. Okay. I think I'm happy that is why it's been adopted by other universities. In fact, a postgraduate this thing in both vet and animal science were coming to ATBU to utilize this technique.
Okay, so now you have a safer and much better procedure for surgery.
Definitely, you got it right.
Fantastic. So that brings us to a main issue today, education, particularly tertiary education, funding, and all other aspects of setting tertiary education on the right footing. TET Fund, the Tertiary Education Trust Fund, you were there before. 2014, you were Executive Secretary.
Sure.
2016. And somehow you left.
Yeah.
And in 2019, January of 2019, you were reinstated as Executive Secretary of TET Fund. You'd like to tell us what went on just for that period?
Just that period.
Yes.
Well, I can tell you, once the new government came in, naturally, you would expect that people needed to know what was happening in TET Fund, being the largest funding avenue for public tertiary institutions in Nigeria. And, well, somehow we had engaged in publicity about what we were doing. And for whatever reason, some persons chose to look at the negatives rather than the positives. I'm proud to say, within my first stint, between 2014 and 2016, it's been said publicly and in private conversations that was a period that perhaps the highest number of physical infrastructure was seen emerging in our public tertiary institutions. And by law, of course, the intervention institutions being public universities, federal or state, public polytechnics, federal or state, and public colleges of education, federal or state. And the next thing I just noticed over time, petitions were being reeled out to the National Assembly, to the presidency, to the investigation agencies, and newspapers, etc. I read things that they associated with me that were outright falsehood. And so when eventually I was invited by the Senate on one of those false allegations, there was the very I would say, loud issue of 200 billion that was purportedly missing. Well, right inside me, I knew that there was nothing like missing 200 billion under my tenure, but that there was 273.9 billion that was taken out and used for the settlement of ASU agreement in 2013. And that was before I came. At the time, that money was, by the directive at the highest level of government, that money was used for that purpose. So when I sat and people were saying, I stole the money, I said, oh my God, this is preposterous. It cannot be associated with me. So when the Senate invited me, and I appeared before them, 5 allegations. One of it had to do with publicity of that fund. We spent 500 million, they wanted to know and all that. And I said for an agency with an average of 150, 200 billion per annum, spending 500 million on publicity, I thought it was justifiable. But on the 200 billion, I said, I read it out to the Senate committee, and it was very clear. One, that I was never associated with anything missing. And there was nothing missing in that fund, because that money was taken in a central account and we're not even signatories. So we couldn't be, so it was a case of, and as soon as I came in 2014, the first letters I sent out to the higher authority was to say, can we have our money back? We were negotiating, and eventually, let me say this, before the former president left, he approved that that money be refunded to all the 273.9 billion. And then President Buhari, I would say, endorsed it. And I have letters to that effect, both of them. So when now there were allegations that we took this money, I said no. And when I read out my defense before Senate, in fact, at the end of the day, it was commendation rather than condemnation. And that is now history. One of the reasons, after I left, there were other investigations, without going into details. At the end of the day, and massively it's true, Mr. President was convinced that there was no basis for anybody to suggest anything negative, and that is why he did the unprecedented in this country. Not only bringing me back to public service, but to the same office, for which I am immensely grateful to Mr. President and the immediate past Minister of Education that recommended that.
All right. Okay, so let's look at the acts. In 2011, we had the TETFund Act, which replaced the Education Tax Fund Act, and that had to do with, the amended act. Of course, it was 1993, if I'm correct. So,
yes.
But then, let's talk about the main source of income. Who should benefit from this fund, and what's been happening with it, and how far have you been able to meet the deficit in infrastructure, first with infrastructure in tertiary education?
First, I thank you very much for this question, and this is a rare opportunity to put some things in correct perspective. You see, ETF then, and now TETFund, did not come by accident. It is, to me, it represents one of the most innovative and creative thinking by academic staff union of universities. And by chance, I was privileged to be a member of the neck of ASU. I was vice chairman of my branch at the time we started negotiation with then military president Babangida. And the idea was simple. Recurrently, we're having ASU strike. In fact, we started the negotiation after we were unbanned. Between 1988 to 90, ASU was banned. We had to mutate and start using another name just for us to continue our activity. I still remember. And in 1990, we were unbanned, and we continued, and that's when we went into the details. After all, what is all this problem about funding? Because even as recent as a few months ago, when ASU called off strike, the issues have recurrently, over the decades, been around funding. So it is a major issue. And that's why ASU decided, let us make a contribution to government. And they went into that innovative thinking of getting an out-of-the-box, non-budgetary funding window. And that is how the idea of Education Tax Fund came. We said a number of multinationals, even many of our institutions, public, private, etc., that are making money, those in business, let us go for just about 2% of the accessible tax and let it be committed to education for the first time in the history of this country. Now that we have crisis in our tertiary subsector, we need to address it, and it's only money that could address it. And that is the idea of education tax fund, and which later became education trust fund. Over time, the law was 1993, the law was amended in 98, and subsequently in 2011. But the amendment in 2011 had to do with the concern of Nigeria, and particularly, as it were, the parents of ETF or TED fund, that's ASU. ASU said, our original idea was this money should be committed to the tertiary subsector. And we noticed that this money is being applied to include even basic subsector, which has UBEC as a main funding outfit, officially supported by law. And others that benefited, which we, ASU was convinced was not right. And it contributed to sparingly applying the funds, and therefore with minimal impact.
Right.
And research institutes, monotechnics, colleges of agri, etc., were benefiting. So, but from the 2011, when the act was amended to focus on the tertiary, which was the original idea, it now was very clear, and I can say this. Since then, you would notice there has been more manifest presence of fiscal infrastructure, even as the first reference of in our public tertiary institutions. But let me quickly say this, which is important. You would notice I'm saying public.
Yes, right.
Yes, I knew that question is likely to come from you. Are we excluding the private?
Right.
Now, each time I face the media, that question comes up. And it's important I take advantage of this moment to explain why ASU insisted that it should be public tertiary institutions. And the law of 2011 was more specific. Just don't leave it as tertiary institution, be specific. So the law specifies universities, right, polytechnics, and colleges of education. So monotechnics are excluded. Right. And let me say this, that it also insists it's public. And the reason is simple. Historically, any responsible government aims at impacting on the largest number of persons in any country. Right. But more importantly, it also focuses more on the less privileged. And today, I can tell you this, the facts are there, that although we have about equal number of public and private universities, that the population statistics is otherwise. And as it is, at the last NUC data read out, 94% of students, university students, are in public tertiary institutions. That is, to me, there's no better way to justify the wisdom of ASU, that look, this funding should be applied to public tertiary institutions. At that time, there were only few private institutions. And I can tell you, as far as ASU was concerned, initially, the first private institutions were more or less profit-oriented. Although that has changed over time, today some private institutions are competing with some of the best, like Covenant University now competing with University of Ibadan, among the top 1,000 in the world. Right. So some things have changed, but basically concentrating on the less privileged segment of society remains the focus and justification by ASU.
So with that in mind, what would you say is the state of public tertiary institutions today in terms of the infrastructure deficit and funding for research?
Thank you very much. I'm very happy that each time you are not missing out on research. Thank you, Cyril. I mean, that is how it ought to be. Let me say this, that for a long time it's been said that Nigerian university had dwelled more around teaching and much less on research. And, well, whatever you will do, even if we have the infrastructure, well, the classrooms, the laboratories, the libraries, call it, if you do not improve or deepen research, you are missing the point. And let me say this, in terms of international global ranking of universities, I talk more about the university. The reason is simple. Historically, the universities are the leaders of research. Others tie up to them, including research institutes globally. Check it out there. Right. So, and the ranking of universities is of concern. I still remember, Mr. President, Muhammadu Buhari, in 2015, when he came, he needed a briefing on the status of education at the time he came in. He was barely 2-3 months in office. And I tell you, after the briefing, the first question he asked, why is it that our universities are low ranked? Believe me, it touches on the nerve of the challenge. Our university cannot be high ranked if there are no funding, justifying why ETF and subsequently TETFund came on board. And at the time that happened, in 2015, for instance, remember that at some point, I think there was no Nigerian university, even among the top 100 in Africa, not even to talk of the world. It was as embarrassing as that, about 8-9 years ago. But with the intervention from TETFund law changing in 2011, now it is 8 good years. There has been significant improvement. Let me say this, for instance, NUC now says minimum qualification for university lecturer is PhD. About 8-9 years ago, there were only 40% of those that hold PhD in our universities. That was bad enough. And thank God, mercifully, over time, with TETFund intervention, improving especially academic staff training and development, the percentage moved to, within 5 years, it moved to 60 and above. And as I'm talking now, I know it has gone above 70%. I need to get the exact figure from NUC. In other words, there is justification for our intervention because it's one of our top, that's academic staff training and development. Then we've gone deeply into research. We've gone deeply into research. We have 2 intervention lines under research. There's the IBR and NRF. IBR, institution-based research, with a maximum of 2 million per research team. And that is managed largely within the universities, polytechnics, and colleges of education. Then the higher one, meant purposely to promote applied research, has a ceiling of up to 50 million. Now that's the one that we focus more on. Because the other one, well, you can dwell more on the theories. But for God's sake, we need to dwell more on the applied research. Precisely why only recently I signed out a document announcing the good news that the Board of Trustees of TETFund has just approved the highest amount committed to NRF, National Research Fund, of 5 billion. The early seed was 3 billion. That was repeated so many years. Another 1 billion was added. 4 billion up to this moment. Now we have 5 billion committed to National Research Fund because we want to refocus on research.
Around the circles, you're known as an apostle of research and development, R&D. But the first question people would say is, what's happening to all the findings, the results that are churned out of institutions, research institutions and the universities? And there's this thing that a very small, it's only a small percentage of that gets commercialized to the benefit of the general populace. Why is this so?
I can tell you, Cyril, I'm sentimental about that. Before I came to TETFund, of course, as a university lecturer and a professor, I knew the issue, and I knew there was a major problem. Remember, I made a point earlier that over time, Nigerian universities have been associated more with teaching and less of research. And that is anomalous, unacceptable. We couldn't proceed that way. We couldn't be competitive in this country. No wonder. The ranking of our universities have been low. So before I came, I knew this. And so when I came, I made a strong case. My Board of Trustees asked me to let them know what were my five-year strategic plan. And amongst them, I gave them a 6-point vision. One of them was I requested that the board approves a department in TETFund on R&D, research and development, and centers of excellence. It's all in the context of the triple helix concept. And what am I talking about? For too long, it appears we have been satisfied churning out publications for the purpose of promotions. Yes, we become professors. And then what? Are we solving national problems? Are our research outputs addressing issues of technology? Are we addressing the issues of economy? In the 21st century, modern economy is knowledge economy. And if it is knowledge, I can tell you it is not teaching that will do that. It is research, because research renews teaching. And we have to solve problems. And that's why I've been an apostle of what I call problem-solving research. Just as you say, I've been an apostle of R&D and put triple helix concept, inviting the industry to the universities, polytechnics, and college of education. And of course, inviting them, and of course, they dangle the money. What are we doing if the outcome of our research does not solve those problems that will make Nigeria be seen to compete? We know in Malaysia, we were there just about 1.5 months ago. They took oil palm from Nigeria, and from the window, the vice chancellor, a professor of vet medicine, said, you look across the window, you see oil palm there. I said, that could likely be the oil palm that you took from Nigeria. He said, yes, please. My God, phenotypically, they are looking something else. My brother, that's exactly the idea. The future of this country lies around what the innovators, the creative minds of our country, the researcher, whether in the University, Polytechnic, College of Education, or the research institutes and centers of excellence, do to demonstrate that education means competitiveness. And I believe that we have started, and my joy today, let me say this, is that we have at the NUC, Professor Abubakar Rashid, who has taken up the issue of triple helix. He's delivering a convocation lecture at Bogoro University, Kano, tomorrow on the triple helix. And some people may not understand what is the essence of the triple helix. It's around bringing the researcher and industry on the same platform, with government playing facilitating role around the environment. The environment, in other words, legal or policy environment. And my R&D dream is that Nigeria should institutionalize R&D. Institutionalize R&D in a manner that there is a law that makes it mandatory that a certain percentage, even if it's 0.5% of turnover of entities that is committed to R&D, in other words, whether it's Lafarge, Dangote, Julius Baja, call it Ashaka Cement Company, that a prescribed percentage by law is available to dangle the money to the researcher in the University, Polytechnic College, and research institute centers of excellence. If that money is there, let me say this, the benefits are many. I believe that it will go a long way. If you are a serious researcher, you are worth your name. As a researcher, as a professor, you have no business being poor. It goes beyond just asking people to be engaged in research. I can tell you, if you are worth yourself, as a consultant, you are sitting in your bedroom, the industry will come and look for you. They will see your profile out there. They will Google it. They will come and look for you. That is my dream. That is the next level for this country.
People say that, good idea, bring the industry and the researchers together on the same page, the same platform, and you're likely to get the results of research taken and put out there for the benefit of the people. But why would it seem that the big industries are not that enthusiastic about utilizing the results of research? They probably just put funding into something that will have a quick turnover, or something that's more in the public view, and not bother about the future.
I'll tell you one thing. Remember, I talked about, that's the essence of the triple helix. One, you don't blame the industry. In fact, over time, I know I said this in a convocation lecture at the Federal University of Technology, Owerri, December 2015. I said in my lecture that a major concern has been observed is mutual distrust between the researcher and the industry. The researcher is not convinced that, the industry rather, is not convinced that there is enough commitment to deepen research, do applied research that will address their problems. And that is become a national problem. And we had looked forward to the researcher carry it to the level, creating awareness, reaching out to the industry. But believe me, it can only be there if we didn't have a law that backs ETF and TED fund today. Whatever any of us would say that we need extra budgetary funding window, nothing will happen. And that is why the third arm is government. And the government policy is if National Assembly or executive bill comes up and that it prescribes and is passed into law that certain percentage, like I said, is committed and it has to be applied. That money cannot be used for anything. Anybody that does that, whether in the industry or any institution, you will go to jail. If that becomes the case, then we now know that is. So I can tell you, in fairness to the industry, I think they have been ready. Maybe we needed to do more from our own constituency as researchers.
Right. So it's, this is where I'm going to, and I'm wondering if the researchers themselves are putting in their best into churning out findings that can be used. You would agree that there are so many things that have been produced in Nigeria today, still using the same basic rudimentary methods that were adopted 60, 70 years ago, in fact, before I was born. And other parts of the world have moved ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Cyril. You just got it right. Precisely why, for instance, in TED Fund, we are supporting 2 levels of research. I said so earlier. The IBR, institution-based research, 2 million. That is supposed to address what I call the basic research around the theories. Some of those theories, like you say, predate your birth. I appreciate that. But we are now saying, look, more money is committed. We announced much higher allocation for NRF recently, 5 billion. It's tantalizing. Only yesterday, I was with Professor Bamiro. That is the chairman of the NRF, former Vice Chancellor, University of Ibadan, I mean, Oxford graduate, PhD, you can call it. This is somebody that is profound, very, very profound. And I tell you, each time we're sharing ideas, and we all agree that we need to up our game in the research community. Universities, Polytechnic College of Education, research centers, and research institutes. And incidentally, we are moving forward. Let me say this to the credit of, for instance, in science, and let me, about R&D, the emphasis is deliberately on science and technology, or the STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics. That is the trend now. The more competitive nation go to China. You don't have to be told. In fact, somebody said, is it a Politburo, whatever, their highest political organ, that 7 out of the 9 of the leadership there are engineers, 2 are economists. That suggests something. We're not saying we just have to copy, but the truth is this, that we must get it right. And for God's sake, we must be more innovative. We must be more creative. Everybody is involved. The scientists need the economists, they need the sociologists to understand the circumstances. Today, if, for instance, there is increased kidnapping, in fact, I've seen professors of whatever being kidnapped. And I say, for God's sake, what do they want to get from these guys? Because they have next to nothing. But what we're saying is that these same guys can help us do research on why is it that kidnapping is overtaking ordinary robbery, just as an example. These are the aspects of the R&D we're talking about. It's not only science. So we can talk about environmentalism and so on and so forth, receding forests and all that, increased desertification. Look at the lecture, as it were. We can go on, and some of the challenges out there in the creeks that are purely environmental. And the engineers, the chemists, the physicists are all there. There are huge opportunities. We must get it right to do deep research. And I insist, if there is deep research, I can tell you that I see a situation where very soon, when people are deeply involved in research, and government ensures, for instance, through the normal budgetary provision, that there is basic adequate funds for salaries and other things, and TED Fund is making available the money for those key intervention areas, about 15 of them now: library development, journals, publication, book, manuscript development, as it were. I mentioned academic staff training, ICT support. In a knowledge economy, ICT is so central. And we can go on until we get that right. For us in TED Fund, I say one thing. We liaise with the regulatory agencies, being what? NUC for universities, NBTE for polytechnic, and NCCE for college of education. Because we do not sit and impose projects on institutions. They know that they have their mothers. That's the regulatory agency, so they guide us.
Okay, so they bring the projects and you take a look at them and see these are viable projects in which to commit funds into.
Indeed, indeed. I can tell you, in fact, that gives me an opportunity, Cyril, to comment briefly about the fiscal infrastructure component. There is a disturbing trend, and I said it earlier that, of course, Nigerians have realized that, look, there has been significant improvement in terms of, but we believe we could still continue. But more recently, stakeholders have said we should tilt more towards the content components, as we call them. That is research, NRF, and so on, product development, to solve the problem that I call problem-solving research. That we should put more, that's why this year we're putting 5 billion. It has never happened before. Okay. On NRF. And there is no doubt about it. Our little concern, I mean, I don't know, I need to quickly mention this. Our little concern is, while we're doing this, we're doing for both federal and state institutions. But here we have the worrisome emergence of universities, polytechnic, and college of education by state government at a rate that easily reflects a kind of complacency because there is TED fund and that they could establish them. But in some of those states, and this is very important, there are many of them have been very commendable, believe me, very responsible, making sure that if they create, they are providing money, basic salary, and all that. But as it is today, you will go and you will discover that most infrastructure are actually from TED fund. So something to do with salary, but I believe that it's important that this is guaranteed by both federal and state government. And
if I get you right, I mean, governments, states are setting up public institutions and hoping that, well, we'll just set them up after all, the funding is going to come from TED fund.
I think that perception is disturbing. Let me say this. It's not that many of the governors are very, very committed, and believe me, they have demonstrated that education is a priority. And over time, let me say this, over the last 5, 6, 7 years or so, there has been more money committed to education sector than we've seen in recent time. But we need to do more and be more creative.
Yes, well, would it just be enough to set up these institutions? Yes, education is important, but state goes ahead and sets up 4, 5 institutions and says, well, not to worry, we're going to get funding from TED fund.
I can tell you, I said, I'm very uncomfortable. It's commendable if a state government decides, look, we want to increase, it has to do with access. We want more space for access to tertiary education. Commendable. But then the disturbing aspect is when suddenly now you discover that they are struggling with even salary. I call it the benchmark minimum. Even salaries. Not to talk about other infrastructure at the end of the year. For instance, I mean, if in a whole year, capital commitment to a tertiary institution by a state government is less than 50 million. Tell me, Cyril, that's not disturbing.
Let me take you back to your discipline. You're a professor of animal science. And we're saying, how well have Nigerian tertiary institutions, universities particularly, performed in the area of research into improving livestock, improving, the yield that you get from, like in dairy products, for instance. In fact, the whole gamut of it has to reduce tensions that we're seeing in the area of raising of animals, breeding of cattle, with access to grounds being one of the biggest issues leading to quarrels, violence, and outright insurgency in some cases.
Yes, thank you very much. You know one thing, agriculture is an existentialist phase of life. It's existentialist. You tell me, can anything else happen if you have not fed for 1, 2, 3 days consecutively? You better imagine that. You know that you are going down by installment. And you, from that point of view, you know that agriculture is central. And I must say this, that if you look at it, most of the application of science and technology, at the end of the day, most of the materials are agro-based. And call it, I mean, whether it's latex, as it were, forests. We talk about livestock, for instance, my own very area. And we realized this. I told you earlier that the regulatory agencies advise the institutions what should be their priorities. Now, we take note of that, and we also liaise with the institutions. What are their priorities? It's been very disturbing for me that, for instance, even in the northern part of the country, where you know the majority of livestock are found, that we've not invested much on dairy. And check out there, some of the healthiest of nations are those that have very robust dairy industry. And milk, as just a pint of milk every day. Take that and couple it with some fresh fruit. Cereal, you'll be looking better every day, I can assure you. And you say, where have we got it wrong? Today, for instance, in the 3 geopolitical zones of the north, we have a number of facilities for livestock. Of course, we have National Production Research Institute in Abuja, National Veterinary Research Institute in Vom. We have huge dairy infrastructure in each of these stations. And only recently, during my first stint in TETFund, I supported the emergence of a dairy research center in ATBU Bauchi. And that, at the moment, it appears the only one in the Northeast. And for a long time, Northeast has always been, and it remains so, with the largest livestock concentration in this country. But you are very right to say, certainly, we have issues. And I tell you one thing, I sit down as a professional, and I listen to the arguments. Of course, you would understand the political leaders have every reason to be talking more regularly about it because it's about the governance issue and all that. But we, the professionals, have been missing. And I use this opportunity to say, I think it's very important that professionals are being listened to. I can tell you, we know it, we've undertaken research, we've been involved, we know why over time, as a result of, we had the grazing reserves for a long time, but they have become derelict, essentially derelict. And we have a sense of guilt. The Federal Livestock Department had done made investments in that area, but over time, and that has contributed to why today there is crisis. And but I believe that professionally, there are many ways to ensure that that is done if appropriate priority is placed on relevant infrastructure with support and subsidy, both for livestock as well as crop, because the livestock have to consume crop. And of course, we've had more investment actually on the crop subsector. And we are hoping the livestock that government, the livestock subsector will have more attention from government, especially now with the sad issue of the restiveness, the clashes, as it were. I think I have a feeling that if the professionals are listened to, we have a number of ideas that we will offer, and we believe it may help to resolving the problem.
Because the thinking is, if, for instance, in the area of livestock, if you could produce, you know, if you could raise your livestock in a particular manner based on research findings, and then have better results and produce more dairy products, for instance, you know, much more than you would if you engage in the traditional practices. Why would anyone not want to stick to that?
Yes, in fact, you are very right, and that is a global reality. That you see, even in terms of productivity, I said it. For instance, you talk about the white Fulani, for instance, breed that produces 1, 2, 3, in very rare cases, above 3 liters of milk per day. As it were, a cow. And compare it with where we're talking of 25, 35, 40, 45 liters of milk of the same for the temperate breeds, or where the environment is better, from housing to breeding to health and so on. So you need that to happen when you have kept your animal under surveillance. That is, there is a housing facility, they are guaranteed, there's no interference, they are not threatened for whatever this thing. But over time, it's also recognized that because it is the clashes that take place from all parts, especially, I mean, all parts of this country, as it were, both the sedentary farmers and so on and so forth. And it's very, very clear that we have to accept that if you look at it, many of our elites actually have ranches, farms where these animals are confined. And we believe that all it takes is increased advocacy. But when the issue is being taken to the level of ethnic, what do you call it, distrust, as it were, and all sorts of tendencies, even going into some realms that are unthinkable, I believe that if the professionals are consulted, we have a lot to offer that will help us to resolve peacefully some of those issues.
Specialized institutions, for instance, we have universities of agriculture, and seeing that the Buhari administration, now in its second term in office, is looking to improve on the economy through agriculture, seen as one area that can provide millions of jobs. Do you go for specialized institutions that will turn agricultural practices around, or you think that we're doing fine enough with what we have, except that we're not coming out with so many innovations as to have the population engage in these practices with better yield?
I agree absolutely. There was wisdom initially when it was discovered that not much attention had been paid to some specialists. That's why you had the universities of technology that emerged in 1980. And well, it's understandable. The technology wasn't, well, agriculture was certainly one of the most important because it's one of the first areas that science was applied to anyway. And definitely you go to all the universities of technology, you find agriculture is very, very central besides other technologies. And it was very clear that there was wisdom behind it, but we've had this issue of where do you house universities of agriculture, federal universities of agriculture, and so on. They have been under the Ministry of Education. Recently, it was moved to Ministry of Agric. Well, I know that there are some things. Any university in Nigeria has to be licensed by NUC.
Right.
And that one cannot be changed. And so if there was an argument about moving them to the Ministry of Agric for the purpose of additional funding, so let's hope that there has been increased funding. I mean, that the funding comes from the Ministry of Agric, but the regulatory responsibility still remains with NUC. That wouldn't change. And yes, there is no doubt about it. If you take a look, some of the priority areas, talking about breeding, the genomics, you take a look at seeds and seedling. It's so central to the prosperity of agriculture enterprise. And we've had challenges. I know that this place in Ibadan, this International Research Center in Ibadan, is contributed, as well as the IARs of what do you call it, Ibadan, as it were, and ABU Zaria, etc., across our universities. They play such very important role in focusing on the areas of the basic as well as the applied components of innovations to carry us to be more competitive and get out there, and through biotechnology, which now the in thing, to get products out there that demonstrate we have gone deep in addressing the issue, because agriculture provides the highest number of possible employment in any country. It has been so. We need to get that right, and I believe I've seen the document on ERGP, and I think it's recognized that knowledge will drive it, and that knowledge has to go down. We take a look at what the profound scientists in each of these areas are doing.
It's said that no one source of funding can be, adequate for everything that's been done. Outside of TET Fund, what's your thinking about grants, funding of research?
Yeah, I can tell you this. I know I mentioned academic staff training and research and all that. one thing I didn't mention is conference attendance. Believe me, both conference attendance and research funding, before TED Fund came on board to intervene in these areas, they were almost non-existent. I will give you as an example. I, as a professor, I remember about 12, 13 years ago, I applied, and the ceiling, the highest you could get, was 80,000 at that time for a serious research.
Naira?
30,000 naira, yes, thank you. It couldn't be dollars, otherwise we will celebrate. It is naira, 80,000 naira. And you couldn't buy basic distillation facility, for God's sake, Cyril. And it was as bad until TED Fund came on board. And then the millions started rolling out to clusters of research groups. And as much as possible, even we're encouraging, as it were now under the R&D thing, that look, we want through research, because research cuts across, whether it's public or private, that through research, let the private universities even benefit. I can tell you, it's the same thing with conference attendance. About 15 years ago, you just couldn't get, in fact, as a university professor, you could almost retire unless you got a grant from international grant that has a component of conference attendance. You could stay 10 years, 15 years, you've never gone for an international conference. It's not just going international for the sake of it. You share knowledge, and you identify strengths and weaknesses of each other in peer review. That is the beauty about conference. And so I can tell you that before TED Fund came on board, it was as bad.
Where do you see TED Fund next couple of years?
Thank you very much. With our moving more into what we call the content components, we're doing so in liaison with the regulatory agencies, NUC, NBT, NCCE. Through them, we have an idea where's the focus. We are now promoting centers of excellence. The R&D department is along with centers of excellence, and we are supporting the emergence of R&D and centers of excellence units. And the idea is, if we have deepened research, then let us see where your strongest capacity is. That is the essence of Center of Excellence, revitalization. I can tell you, Cyril, as you know it, we are convinced, and that is why we are committed, and increasingly, I can tell you at some point in time, about 20 years ago, we discovered there were hardly any textbooks emerging from the university system. And that's why we came about the book development thing. And now, with the manuscript development, many textbooks by Nigerian professors and lecturers are emerging out there in the bookshops and in the public space. That is what it ought to be. If we do not invest on research, if we do not invest on the content component, improving our library, the virtual and the book-based component, we are reflecting that we are not ready to compete with the rest of the world. That is unacceptable, and at TED Fund, we are partnering with the regulatory agencies. That's why I'm so excited. I repeat that Professor Rashid Bakar, the ES of NUC, is giving a lecture on triple helix tomorrow at the Bogoro University, Kano. And it is to underline the future. If knowledge does not define our future, what else will?
So, it's a gradual shift away from what people see and say development in tertiary education. It's all about the physical structures that you see, and you would judge perhaps the quality of tertiary education by the beautiful structures that you see. Now you're shifting attention to content.
Content.
Right.
Precisely. I tell you, we can only be competitive if we are deepening research. I say this, and it's very clear, and one of the things that I might not have mentioned, and I need to quickly do so, I want to see our universities, Polytechnic College of Education, emphasize research in many manifest ways. For instance, that there are more awards for the best researchers.
Right.
You have distinguished research professors awards emerging in our universities. Many of the universities have, many others don't. Those that don't have should learn from it. But something that I said at my Futo Oweri lecture, December 2015, is this. I look forward to, and that ties up with the triple helix in the R&D Trust, I look forward to most professors going to do sabbatical in the industry rather than going only to educational institutions. Believe me, that will represent the future. That is the correct thing.
All right. Professor Suleiman Elias Bogoro, it's been interesting talking to you on one-on-one. We hope you'll come again and we can explore further the improvements in research and development. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Cyril. It's a pleasure.
Right.
No problem. Thank you.
And that's our program today. We thank you for being with us. Next week, we'll be back with One-on-One. I am Cyril Stover. Bye for now.